We are here in this room with friends, and they may be critical friends, but they are friends nevertheless. And we're here because we all believe that research can make a really valuable contribution to development. And we've heard a lot this morning about many of the ways in which that happens, many of Rachel's examples, some of David's examples. And access to research literature is a vital part of this. I'm sure you'd all agree it's the lifeblood of research. It's what ensures that researchers and students use the best methodologies for their work, are staying up to date with latest trends in the field, with latest theoretical developments, and are part of that academic, scholarly research conversation with their peers all around the world. And you, as publishers, have a really important role to play in this. But we also know that times are changing, access is changing, access models are beginning to shift. Open access, as Brian spoke about, is disrupting some of the established business models. We also know many publishers still do want to provide free access to resources or discounted access, working with philanthropic schemes such as ours, such as Research for Life. But we know for some publishers in some countries, they do want to start working towards direct commercial relationships with our partner countries. So we want to open a conversation with you, and that's really important. This is a conversation to hear from you, to understand from you, as publishers in particular, your pressures and constraints, and how this feels to you and how we can work with you best. And this is an important opportunity for the people in the room who aren't publishers, so myself, colleagues at INASP, our partners here from various African library consortia and universities, to hear from you about your perspective on this as well. So a few key points to kind of frame this discussion. Firstly, affordability. So we think access to information, it's vital that it's affordable. And when we say affordable, we mean that resources are priced in such a way that they reflect what developing countries, our partners, can realistically and reasonably afford to spend. And that means spend without taking money away from other vital areas. So there are huge investments to be made in research infrastructure, teaching facilities, laboratories, research training. And those all need money, and these are all competing pressures on university budgets, which are often limited. And it needs to be sustainable. So pricing models need to be affordable, not just this year or next year, but the year after that, the year after that. And countries need to be able to plan and budget effectively for those prices to purchase e-resources and to ensure they can sustain that investment at a national level over a number of years. And to make this work, we have to move at the right pace. So university budgets, as many of you will know, are often unpredictable. Their governments and universities can often be slow to disperse funding. There are often regulatory requirements which make it hard to access money which is being committed, hard to transmit that money overseas to pay for goods and services published internationally. So moving too quickly as relationships start to shift and change could do two things, neither of which we want to see happen. One, it could really damage access at a point when research is really getting much greater investment, as is higher education, when people are beginning to make a stronger and more impressive case for investments in research. So to damage access at that point could really jeopardize many of those attempts to attract serious long-term investments in higher education and research. But access being damaged will also damage relationships. And a lot of what we're talking about here today is relationships between publishers, library consortia, librarians, and the other various capacity building and support initiatives which work with them. And my fourth point is that many of you will have seen, either from your own experience or from various media reports in the specialist university and research news services, that there's some great new investments being made in higher education and in universities, and that's really, really important. More research is being done. We're seeing much more research being published from African authors, and this gives a general sense that things are on the up, and that's really good to see. But there's been 20 years or more where university budgets, research budgets have been incredibly, incredibly strained. Universities and research institutes eviscerated, laboratories, facilities, student hostels, academic training, really crying out for investment. So this is starting to shift, but there's so many bills to be paid. So new investment in higher education does not automatically mean there is more money to purchase e-resources just yet. So a country which often receives a lot of attention in these kind of stories about success and investment and progress is Kenya. So in Kenya, in recent years, student enrolments to public universities have risen 7 times faster than the public investment in those universities. So we've got a situation where already strained infrastructure and facilities, recovering from 20 years or more of underinvestment, are not only having to cope with rehabilitating and improving those resources and facilities, they're having to do it when many more students are coming through the door as well, straining those resources even further. So on our blog, we published a few weeks ago a set of what we called key principles for responsible engagement for publishers who wish to really want to engage seriously and responsibly with our partner countries and with other developing countries. But we'd like to discuss these with you, because for these to be meaningful, they have to be principles which aren't just those that we as INASP publish, broadcast and say, you must do these 4 things. They have to be things which are meaningful for you, work for you, and we understand the things which will hinder or help you, if you believe in them, to work with us in order to put these into practice and to build more sustainable, well-paced relationships between our partner countries and you as publishers. So we've had about 200 views of this blog, so we know it's been read, and I hope many of you in the room have also read it, and have had some chance to think about it from the perspective of your publishing house or your society partners, who are no doubt an important constituency. So the first principle, understand the country context. Now, I'm sure many of you do this anyway. Many of you have either agents or staff and officers based in various countries or in the region, or you travel to those countries, or you stay up to date via various information sources. So we know you probably take this quite seriously as part of your daily business. We also know it can be quite hard. So we find it hard at INASP to stay up to date with what's happening in our 20-plus partner countries. So there are people in this room who can help you if you do have gaps in your understanding, to help build that information base. But when we say the country context, what we particularly mean, for example, is going beyond a capital city. So it's very easy to get quite a skewed picture of a country's higher education system by looking only at 1 or 2 universities in a capital city where access may be better, connectivity, infrastructure may be much better than it is in a 2nd, 3rd or 4th city, or in a rural area where lots of new universities are being developed. Our second principle is and I've got a bit of a typo here, is respecting the wish of a country to negotiate rather than develop, although that's also true, to negotiate as a consortium or as a purchasing club of some type. So we would urge you to, if a country says to you, we have a consortium, that's how we want to work with you, respect that and work with them. Don't try and find alternative routes via institutions or via ministries, because countries are working really hard to build an infrastructure which works for them and which will be sustainable. So anything you do to try and circumvent that for a particular business deal is going to put more pressure and strain those countries further as they try and do what we're all trying to achieve here, which is improve access and improve research. And this is also important because going back to the point about one or two very visible, very high-profile universities, we believe fundamentally that for research to happen and to support development, it needs to be a research system. So we're talking here not just about world-class universities, but a world-class research system. And that research system has to be quite broad, has to have different types of institutions doing different things, serving different needs, and they all need access. And the consortia are working very hard to also train librarians and train users. So they are directly improving the ability of their universities and their researchers to use and access this research material, which is available to them either through schemes like ours or through partnerships with you. And the third point is, don't make sudden changes. So if you do wish to work on a direct basis with a country, let them know, and let them know in plenty of time, because these things take time for a country to anticipate new relationships, new systems and processes, particularly when they're working via initiatives such as ours, which actually cover an awful lot of that back office work for both countries and for publishers. So let them know in plenty of time, and think medium to long term here. Don't think going direct in 12 months' time. Think of a plan to work with countries over a number of years. 3 to 5 years is a much more practical and sensible approach to working with a country to shift those relationships. And I'm sure they will appreciate you and enjoy a much better relationship with you if you take that into account. And we understand that when a publisher moves towards a direct relationship, there are going to be extra costs, because at the moment, some of those services are provided by organisations such as our own, for both the country and for the publisher. So we appreciate there may be an additional margin needed if you're dealing directly. But think medium to long term on those prices, and if they do need to increase, make them firstly affordable, make them incremental, and make them predictable, and that's really important. So back to the point that universities have to compete for the right investment, libraries have to access sufficient budgets, consortia need to build those budgets, make them predictable, because it will make it a lot easier in the process. So what I'd like to do now, I was going to say now for something a bit different, but Rachel's already beat me to that. So I want to use this opportunity while you're all in the room to try and get a bit of a conversation going, and it can continue later as well. So I'd like to know first, if you agree with these principles. I'll put them back up in a few moments. And if you do agree, I'd like you to share with us what would hinder you to work in such a way, and what would help you. So what is it about these principles, if you think, as we do, these are important and desirable and achievable, what would help or hinder you to work within those? So I'm not sure how the room is mixed, but if we could spend the next 5 minutes, if you could turn to somebody next to you, hopefully a publisher, and talk about these, and see what they feel for you. We haven't had an awful lot of questions today, so I'm really hoping now is the point in the day where we can have a bit more of a conversation. I haven't got a watch on because it's broken, so it's almost 2:30, so give this 5 minutes or so. Have a chat. Hopefully you've already read these, you've already thought about these issues anyway. Have a chat with the person next to you, see what they think, and then hopefully share those with us, and we can refine and improve these as we work together. Okay? So these are the 4 principles. I'll give you 5 minutes. It sounds like everyone had quite a lot to talk about there, so I'm hoping it was about these questions rather than about anything else. I'll take the first question, the first principle as probably reasonably uncontentious and straightforward, and in the time we've got available, and this I would stress is starting a conversation. It's not the end of it. So there's plenty of time to talk to us later, talk to us face-to-face. We are, if you'd like to talk a bit more about these issues and to bring in some of your colleagues, let me know, because we could arrange a time to meet and talk about this a bit more, because I'm sure for many of you there are other people you need to bring into these kind of conversations. But does anybody have any thoughts or feedback on number 2 with the word develop, reading, negotiate? You can tell I write my slides far too late in the day when my brain's a bit tired. So respecting the wish to negotiate as a consortium or as a national purchasing club. Do you have any feedback on that? So what would help or would hinder you as publishers?
I'm from Taylor & Francis. I've just taken over the responsibility of looking after INASP within our organisation. So forgive me, I'm a bit new. But I was just saying that with one of the countries within the INASP group, we do work with their consortium, and certainly all the sort of negotiation things like payments and everything takes place by that consortium. So we're happy to do, we're happy to work with that where there's a two-way conversation going on, and you've got the contacts there. It's good. So we see that as a positive thing to do. Also with, and maybe this comes along later with some of the other points, but as I'm talking, we are, for one country, we are thinking that it's time for them to transition out of the INASP deal with us. Their GDP is growing, and they're doing very well as a country. But we have been talking to them, and we feel that this should be facilitated at a very gradual pace. So, we're happy to work with them in this case to move them forward, which will be good, good for them as well, I think. So, but we want to do this very much so over a period of, let's say, 5 years, so that it's a gradual growth process.
That sounds really, really, really positive, and it's really great to hear that, and I'm sure our partners here will also be very welcoming of that. Does anybody else have anything to add on the consortium topic? Richard?
Yeah, I think this is Richard Geddy from Research for Life. I think it's interesting that if you are a INASP publisher or Bible publisher, then very likely the relationships that you've had with INASP have been quite likely with consortia. So it's not a simple, but it's a relatively less complex thing to transition from a INASP mediated arrangement to a direct bilateral one. It just comes down to the matter of just comes down, but in fact a matter of pricing terms and this sort of thing. It gets a little bit more complicated within a Research for Life environment, because in Research for Life, the relationship between the publisher and the beneficiaries is not as a consortium level, it's individual institution by individual institution. And what this means is that so on and so forth, who wouldn't normally qualify to be members of a research-intensive university consortium. And I think then the challenge then for all of us is to work out a transitional arrangement that does one or two things, either from the point of view of Research for Life to continue to work with the way in which we segment and granularise the categorisation of institutions so that you're not faced with the choice of excluding a whole country. And that is the case now. You can actually decide to exclude research-intensive universities that include vocational training centres, include teaching hospitals, exclude teaching hospitals, include community health centres. So that's one thing, I think, a challenge for Research for Life to develop that sort of segmentation, so you can do a deal with the consortium without disenfranchising the people that aren't members of that consortium. The alternative is a challenge for the publisher to say, we don't want to disenfranchise a lot of these small organisations that aren't a member of the consortium. Can we work to get the consortium to embrace them as well and to include them in any deal? So I think there's a sort of choice in a way between challenges. It's either a challenge for Research for Life or a challenge for individual publishers, where are these relationships that go further than the main national consortium.
Yeah, I would agree with Jonathan from Wiley. Been thinking about exactly that. If you picture a sort of post-INASP, post-Research for Life scenario in a given country, then the last thing you want to do in the process is to disenfranchise anybody. And it would typically be those non-consortial, perhaps isolated, medical research centres and so forth, dotted around outside the capital cities. So I would welcome guidance on which way to go in country by country if we do get to that situation.
Yes,
ideally, it would be absorbed into a consortium structure, because the consortia would be the natural organisations within, after the training you guys have been doing, and for a whole host of other reasons, they would be the natural bodies with whom we would expect to work. And I think you mentioned, John, about other alternatives that a publisher such as us might have. And I think the only scenario in which we might, in my mind, look at talking to anything from the body other than the consortium would be for content which we publish, which really isn't for the academic market, which, that's a whole different ballgame. Then the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of something else might come into the equation. But otherwise, for anything which is, in our world, research-oriented, or indeed for that matter, undergraduate textbook-oriented, I would see the main conversation as being absolutely our consortium friend.
Yeah, and I would say that from a research point of view, that seems logical. If there are logistical or political issues that prevent a consortium in the capital city embracing a collection of community health centres 500 miles away, then we would be here to offer you the option to get to those in parallel with what you're doing, but not to have us also offering gratis access to the people who are dealing with.
I think there's an interesting point here for our consortium partners to consider, which is how you can make the boundaries of your consortium potentially a bit broader, and what types of institutions you can work with. There might be some opportunities there. Does anybody have any other comments, either on the consortium, or I think we're kind of merging issues here, which is absolutely fine. They are very, very interconnected. Elizabeth?
Yeah, two things. So one about consortium is that from the publishers. So we're a medium-sized publishing company, mainly publishing humanities, social sciences, and international law. And we find we love to work with consortia and countries, but often the number of institutions that would want to subscribe as part of the consortium is less. So sometimes we still end up going directly to institutions because in the consortium they have enough uptake where they go to that. So I think that's a challenge more for the humanities social sciences publisher and of a medium size. I think probably would be interesting to see what the other thing, but that's a more general question, have you also considered linking this to other initiatives like the UN Global Compact and the 10 business principles? A lot of multinational companies or even small medium-sized companies that operate globally subscribe to these 10 business principles, which are broader, and these are more publishing specific, but it would be good to see if you could link them.
Anybody else?
Speaker, Alan Harris. I'd like to see more buy-in from government in close cooperation with the consortiums in the long-term vision of the government. Otherwise, any form of funding that consortiums in the developing world get is never sustainable. They buy one that publishes products and they have nothing left for the rest. So it needs to be part of the vision. And that also includes research.
Well, I think that's a really important, critical thing, is that if consortia are building relationships with their respective ministries, that's a much more sustainable route, because they are building funding strategies which are multi-stranded, which are, and they will know what works best in their particular country. So I think
it's not always happening. It's not happening to the extent it should be happening, and there's big barriers there in most countries.
Barriers to
getting the buy-in from government.
okay.
Governments are saying this is your budget and you've got to live within this.
Okay. Name from.
I think one observation, I really like the point. I think they're very important to go to the country that way. And what I find really, really crucial is to understand how the consortium works, how they are funded, and how to work with them way before they will be out of research for life or INASP. Only then you can provide sustainable growth to them and assure good cooperation, because I think the time is really important to build that and to make sure that those consortia and these countries are mature enough to stand on their own, to have their own negotiations, to know how to negotiate, to know how to work. Otherwise, it's really tough for them, and you see some countries going back to research for life, for example, from this perspective. So I think as a publisher, we need to take this really into consideration.
Jon, I think we've just got time for one last question.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll take hard one. I'll take Agatha's question here, but then please do talk to me later, or write to me, or ring me, and we can talk about this in the future and keep this as a hopefully a growing conversation. So Agatha.
I think because of I just want to respond to the issue of getting by with the government. I think I speak on the experience in Kenya is the same with many of the other countries of my colleagues who are here with me, that in the past we have tried to work with the government, but in most of our situations, it depends on the government of the day. You might approach the government this year and you find that the election year comes and the priorities of the incoming government changes. So you might rely on the funds from the government, and then you find that next year you are not able to pay for the resources. So as much as possible, we try to get the allocation from the government to the institution, and that is what we work with. Otherwise, if we rely on the government for funding the resources, sometimes you'll be in trouble and you'll not be able to sustain the access. So I think when you approach the government as a publisher, and the government is willing to work with you as a publisher, you find that they might promise you heaven, but in the long run, you'll not get anything from the government. You still have to come back to the consortium.
Just Sue, do you want a microphone or?
No, I'll speak loudly. I just wanted to make a comment, having observed a really interesting interaction between a consortium representative and a publisher, but also to comment a bit from my own publishing experience, because 10 years to the day, pretty much, I was running the sales team at Blackwell, along with Emily But went in with a new model, that was the less happy bit, because I think it was a bit of a rush. But then at the end of the day, there was a degree of compromise and a deal was struck. And so what I'm reminded by is how the tyranny of the sales model, as I experienced it when I was running the sales team. It was the most intellectually challenging work that I did in publishing. I don't know if it's still like that for you guys. Maybe it's easy nowadays. But coming up with these sales models was really hard 10 years ago. And I'd love to know whether it's still really hard and complicated. And what that seemed to mean is that a lot of time and thinking would go into devising the next sales model, getting buy-in from everybody in the company, and then there was a rush to push it out to market, which puts terrific pressure on, of course, the partners. So I'm just, in any time that we've got left, I would be very interested in any comments on, is it still like that? Or is it easier now coming up with these new iterations of the models in a way that will mean that actually, particularly for countries in the south, we can give more notice of what's likely to be coming up?
I think Wiley, it's been relatively complex construct for the proprietary model, but it doesn't need to remain that way, and I don't think it needs to be that way in the sort of southern markets and turn them that way, because as far as on one of the slides it mentions publishers who publish for societies, obviously that's a big constituency for Wiley, and I think the issues with any kind of simplification or changes to our sales model, the consultation with society, which is an inevitable part of that, is really about the impact on the UK, Germany, etc., etc. It's not really about. I think that they and we have different priorities, which enable us to make things simpler in the south in terms of just giving something which can be described in one sentence and understood locally. So that's my feel.
I think Lucy standing up is my cue to get off and hand the microphone on. What I'd love to say to you is that please, if you want to work with us on these, let us know, because I'd be more than happy for myself and some of my colleagues to come and talk to you further, and some of your colleagues, because let's make these things work as well as we can to help our partners in these countries who are doing their best job to build research and higher education structures. Really want to do that with the many constraints they face, and let's do what we can do to make that a more manageable and easier prospect. So please get in touch and we can come and talk to you further about this. Thank you.